This is my sourdough starter, or at least it used to be. Pink and purple mold, a smell I wouldn't wish on anyone. Every blog, every expert would tell you one thing: throw it away. But here's the thing, I didn't. I just couldn't. And what happened next surprised even me. So stick with me, because this is the story of how I brought my sourdough starter back from the dead, using the old world methods that homemakers used for generations. And yes, it actually worked. With pink and purple molds, even red mold, this was bad. The smell was horrifying. It literally smelled like death. And so I had a choice. I think most people would throw this away and think that they needed to start over. But I can't imagine that a pioneer woman would throw away her starter. You know, even something that had been passed down from generation to generation, or even given from her mom or grandma. So I decided to try to save it. And that's just what I did. I saved about a teaspoon of my starter from the very bottom of the jar. I discarded all of the mold. I even threw away the jar. I just couldn't handle the smell of it. And I fed it about a 1-to-4 ratio. And no, I'm not really measuring here, but I added about a cup of water and about a cup of flour, maybe a little bit more, to my teaspoon of starter. Mixed it all together until it was thick, like a thick batter of pancakes. And I set it here on the counter. I have a little lid. The cap is loose so some oxygen can still get in there. And I'm going to check on it tomorrow and see how it all turns out. And I'm going to be looking for signs of a healthy sourdough starter. So the typical smells of sourdough. I'm looking for that tangy, tart, sour smell. So this is after 24 hours. My kitchen is really warm right now. It's in the middle of summer, and there's a little bit of watery substance on top, which tells me that this sourdough was very hungry, and it actually digested all of the grains that were in the jar. So I discarded most of it, left a little bit more, probably more like a tablespoon or so in the jar. And I did throw it away because of how scary the original state of the sourdough was. I'm going to throw it away for the next 2 to 3 days about, until it starts to smell really good and starts to show signs of normal sourdough. So I'm going to continue the process of feeding the sourdough starter every day with the ratio 1-to-4 with the flour, water, and sourdough starter for about 3 days, until I start seeing good signs of a healthy sourdough starter. This would be the 3rd day. I started to do smaller batches of sourdough starter because I didn't want to throw so much away. It looks bubbly, and this is at the state where it started to smell really good, like normal sourdough, like yogurt, tangy sourness. It didn't have any off-putting smells. It didn't smell bad or yucky. It smelled like something that I would cook with. So I thought I would put together a couple of recipes that I like to make with my sourdough discard. The first recipe that we're going to be making is some sourdough tortillas. So to get my sourdough starter active and bubbly for these recipes, I put it in a separate bowl and I did a 1-to-2 ratio, about half a cup of sourdough starter to 1 cup of flour and 1 cup of water. When you do ratios like this, your sourdough starter actually ferments quicker, and that's nice if you're trying to get a recipe going. So for my sourdough tortillas, I'm getting about a half a cup of beef tallow melting here in the cast iron, and I'm using about 1 cup of sourdough starter and 2 to 3 cups of whole wheat flour. And then I'm going to add about a teaspoon of salt to this. Okay, it looks like 2 teaspoons. I always just eyeball these things. And now I'm mixing that all together with the water. And I'm going to let it all ferment here on the countertop for about 4 hours. This is something that's nice to get going in the morning or early afternoon, and then you can whip it up for dinner after it's done fermenting. You'll also notice that the time of fermentation and how long it takes for your sourdough to be ready to bake with depends on the temperature of your kitchen. And right now, the kitchen is very, very warm. So things are fermenting much quicker. And I thought it would be so nice to have some cookie bars to take over to a friend's house we're going to dinner with tomorrow. And so I'm going to get started some sourdough chocolate chip cookie bars. And I will make sure to put some of these recipes down in the description box below for you guys. And these cookies were absolutely delicious. So I'm going to put some saran wrap over these cookie bars and put them in the fridge, and I'll bake them up tomorrow afternoon before we go over to our friend's house, and that will give them some time for slow fermentation. So how did I let my sourdough starter get to such a terrible state? Well, that's a really good question. Let me tell you a little backstory. I have been processing loads of cucumbers, and my kitchen has been full of boxes and bowls of cucumbers. Some of those cucumbers ended up going bad, and they were sitting nearby my sourdough starter that I pretty much had forgotten about. It was sitting on the counter, so I hadn't fed it for probably 3 days. It's been very, very warm in the kitchen. Our AC unit's having some trouble, so we turned it off for a couple days, and it's been very hot. So with those multiple factors in place, that is how my sourdough starter molded over. And it wasn't until probably the 3rd day that I noticed this color in the jar that I had never seen before, and I knew something had gone wrong. And it really smelled terrible. I thought it was the rotten cucumbers that had been smelling so bad, and it was actually my sourdough starter that smelled worse than anything. Normally, I store my sourdough starter in the fridge, even if it's unfed, and that keeps it lasting throughout the week until I'm ready to use it again. But I just was distracted. I think this sort of thing could happen to anybody. We all get distracted, we get busy, and we can forget about our sourdough. But the real takeaway here that I learned is that as nasty as your sourdough can get, it can be revived. In fact, I am part of a Facebook group online that has to do with sourdough. I often see people showing their left out moldy sourdough starter and even throwing it away. And I always think to myself, don't throw that away. That could probably be revived because sourdough is so sturdy. So I baked up our chocolate chip cookie bars. They've been fermenting in the fridge overnight, and they're delicious. So here we are on the following day. I've fed my sourdough starter the night before, and I've set it on the counter to rise and be bubbly. I put a rubber band around the level where it last was as I fed it, and look at it. It has doubled even a little bit more. It's bubbly. You can see it through the glass jar. You can see that it's bubbly on the bottom and the top, And that means that this sourdough starter is active and it's ready to make bread. If you haven't noticed, I do smell my sourdough starter a lot just to see where it's at. It is a key indicator to me to know how ready it is and where it's at, if it's hungry or if it's been well fed. When it's ready to make bread, it smells almost fruity and it smells yummy and good enough to eat almost. When your sourdough starter is unfed and maybe it hasn't been fed for the whole week and it's been sitting in the fridge, it smells very sour, even vinegary, or even sometimes like fingernail polish. And I like to feed it a little bit before I make recipes with my sourdough starter, just because it's so strong. A while back, I threw out all of my recipes for making bread, and I challenged myself to make bread instinctively. And I was really inspired by a lot of the pioneer recipes back in the day, and I just wanted to take the stress out of bread making and the intensity out of the whole sourdough thing and just start trusting my eye and what feels right. So today I'm making 2 loaves of bread, and it's about 6 cups of flour. I like to do more all-purpose flour than whole wheat, so if there's a mixture there. There's about 1 cup of sourdough starter and about a cup or so of water. I mix that all together. Oh, and about 1.5 teaspoons of salt as well. You can't forget the salt. Bread just has to have salt to taste good. I mix it all together into a shaggy dough, and I let that auto-lease for a little bit. And then whenever I remember, I just pop back in and give the dough some working over. We call it stretch and fold these days. Back in the old pioneer journals, it was always referred to just as kneading the dough. So we just know that gluten needs to be worked over to be activated. And I don't set a timer or anything. It's just whenever I remember to come back in and work the dough. So I do like to give it some sort of a stretch and fold where I stretch the dough over itself until it's nice and elastic. There's a nice elastic skin on the dough. After the auto-lease, then I let the bread ferment for about 4 hours or so, and then I shape it. And this is how I do the shaping process. I just keep that elastic skin intact and shape it right into a big dough ball and put it into my proofing baskets. And it just really depends on what the day looks like. After I shaped my dough, this time I put it right into the refrigerator so I could bake it the following day. I really do like the results with the bread after it's been in the refrigerator. It does proof in the refrigerator, but it slows down the fermenting process. And it also scores really nicely when the dough is cold. I've spent far too much time in the past setting timers, following instructions exactly, and worrying about this whole sourdough bread thing. And I finally got to a point where I was done stressing about it and feeling bad if my crumb didn't look like the girl's picture online, and just started enjoying the process of baking bread. And so I really try to let my sourdough work around my schedule and what I'm doing, and not the other way around, to not schedule my life and what I'm doing around the sourdough bread and when it needs to go into the oven and all the things. And so the refrigerator can be a great tool for just holding that sourdough bread off until you're ready to pull it out and ready to bake it up. have a couple of old Dutch ovens that I use just for baking my bread at these high temperatures. And this is what your Dutch ovens look like after baking your breads at 400 and 500 degrees. And one of my Dutch ovens does have some baking weights, some pie baking weights. They're ceramic, and I have noticed that when I bake my bread on those ceramic pie weights, that the bottom never burns. I just need to get some more for the other Dutch oven, so one bread loaf is always crispier than the other. But I bake my bread at 450 degrees for about 20 minutes, then I take the lid off and let it bake for about 15 minutes more, and I usually lower the temperature to about 400 degrees so that it doesn't get too crispy. But here is how it all turned out. And if you can remember what our starter looked like at the beginning of this video, this is what we were able to create after 5 days. 5 days of feeding and refreshing the sourdough starter and caring for it. After all, it is a live and living thing. And take note of the two different crusts. One was baked on the ceramic pie weights and one was not. If you think about where my starter was at the beginning of this video and what we were able to create with it now, it's pretty amazing. So the next time your sourdough starter looks scary and smells scary, think twice before throwing it out. The best things in life are the things that just keep giving back. And I believe sourdough is one of those things. And it was meant to last for a very long time. Thanks so much for watching today's video, and I'll catch you guys next week for another video on restoring home, family, and spirit through tried and true homemaking skills. Love you lots!